Hello, class. I promised as a part of this course we would talk a little bit about career development theory, so I want to make sure that I follow through on that. So for a lot of time, people have wondered, what the heck am I going to do for a job? And it's probably as long as people have existed, they've had jobs they didn't particularly enjoy or particularly want. And so all the way back to early 20th century, around 1905 or 1906 or so, Frank Parsons was creating what he called the Vocations Bureau in Boston, where he would do these interviews with folks who didn't know what direction to go in career-wise. And he would interview them. And based on his observations and his interview, he would direct them on which path to take in their career. And we'll talk about some of the other theories, but some of the more popular ones from recent have been like happenstance theory, this idea that you've got to make your own luck, and regardless of what happens, that you can find something and turn it into a great career. And so that first job might be in retail, but maybe you can find some skills in that you can then leverage into a career in an industry that's growing where you can be successful. In my case, I would my undergrad was in English, and that I wanted to write the great American novel. And you'd be surprised at how few employers want to hire you to do that. And so, oddly enough, while I was working on it, my father one day, he had been self-employed for a while and he needed a resume. We'll talk more about him later. And he was like, "Hey, can you write me up a resume?" Well, I'd been in my college career office, which was much smaller than what it is today. And I'd worked on my resume there, so I had a pretty good idea. And so I banged out on my word processor a resume form, printed it out, gave it to him. He got hired for the job. And so years later, 3 or 4 years later, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my career. And I was really struggling. I mean, I'd been doing everything from working in a freezer overnight, filling orders, to working security overnight at the Holyoke Mall, all these very glamorous jobs, to working overnight. I don't know if you sense the theme here, in a residential group home. So I tried selling cars. I actually did sell one car. It was a used car, so I actually got more money for that. And it was actually that stint selling cars that when I interviewed with this human services organization, they hired me to get my start in career development because they needed somebody who could sell. And I figured if I could sell cars, I could go out into the community and get employers to agree to accept vocational rehabilitation sites. And that's what I did. And I'd go out to a company, it might be CVS, and I would say, hey, there must be some jobs here that none of your employees like to do. And they'd be like, yeah, fill in the soda coolers. And I'll be like, well, hey, hire one of my guys or gals and they'll come in and they'll fill the soda cooler for you and change the prices on all the products for you. And they're like, that sounds great, but you're telling me they have a major mental illness. What if they don't show up? And I would say, that's the beauty of it. If they don't show up, I'll come in and do the job for free and I'll get you a tax credit. And so that was a pretty compelling pitch. And now bear in mind, I really did have to go in and cover those jobs. And so, I go by Jay here, but for the longest time, people knew me as JA. And so for weeks on end, I was going in every day and filling the soda coolers. And then I ran into somebody I knew, and I was kind of mortified because here I am, mid 30s, and I'm working in a CVS filling a soda cooler. And I was just like, couldn't really tell them what I was really doing. And I was just mortified. And this was at Tower Square, which is the old Bay State West in Springfield. There used to be a CVS in there. They've since moved down into I believe it's in the south end now. So we used to park in the parking garage and they'd validate our parking. And so I'm I get out of the shift. I'm just like, I'm already having a horrible day. I've just spent hours filling soda coolers. And I just ran into somebody I knew, and I just feeling like, oh. So I'm on the escalator, and I'm riding up the escalator, and I look up, and in the window is the sign, "What can JA do to make a difference?" I almost fell off the escalator. I'm looking around. I'm thinking I'm in like that old show, Punked, looking to see like someone messing with me. Am I having a surreal moment? And like, what is going on? I suddenly realized I was in front of the Junior Achievement Office, JA, Junior Achievement. But anyway, from there, I ended up getting promoted to supervising a program, working with the homeless mentally ill to help them get services and get gainful employment once they were stabilized. And from there, I got promoted to managing a program that would work with folks who were on transitional assistance and who were running out of time under welfare to work. And so they would come to see me, and I would work with them on their barriers to successful employment, and did really well there. And at that time I was working on my master's degree, and those two things, being a manager and working on my master's degree, were enough where I was the lead candidate for a job with the One Stop Career Center. Finished my master's degree, had worked there for 6 years, and that really opened up the door to going into higher ed as a career center director. And then being a career center director for a certain number of years opened up the door to be able to teach a couple courses in career development. And now that I'm almost done with my doctorate, hopefully it'll open up other doors as well. So, I didn't ever in college think, oh, you know what, I want to be a career director, but I took advantage of the opportunities as they came upon me. Opportunities that did not come about in either a freezer, um, riding around plainclothes security overnight at the Holyoke Mall, or working overnight in a group home. So that's one theory, making the most of those opportunities. Another is chaos theory, which I'm particularly fond of. Chaos theory, which is this idea that the future is so complicated and there's so many factors that go into it that we can't predict it. There was a really terrible movie called The Butterfly Effect, starring Ashton Kutcher some years ago. And this is a really good job of kind of breaking it down. There were these meteorologists who were working on computer modeling for the weather. And they were finding that, hey, they were hitting it out of the park for like that 5-day forecast. But once they started getting into a couple of weeks, even though it was looking good when they would leave at the end of the day, by the time they came in the morning and started getting into that second week, it was breaking down. And it was because there were too many factors, so much so that something as small as a butterfly flapping its wing on the other side of the globe was enough to throw off the weather. And so this is a theory that says that the rate of change in the world, the speed of which we are developing our technology, the rate of automation, scientific advancement, the pace of globalization is so fast that it is impossible for us to predict the future. And even where we have success, that career that you're trying to prepare for today will probably be obsolete by the time you graduate. The first job you have out of college probably doesn't even exist yet, and that'll have a lifespan of only about 5 years, and you're going to have to find something else. And so it puts less of an emphasis so much on planning, but more on your ability to adapt to rapid change. So even in the last year, with what's been going on with tariffs, who knows what's going to happen? Will American companies reshore and begin vast manufacturing operations in this country? It's possible. And then, could there be job opportunities that are far more lucrative for you in middle management in a factory? Um, 10 or 15 years ago, well, maybe a little bit, 20 years ago, it went without saying that, oh, there were always jobs in retail. They weren't great jobs. They weren't particularly rewarding jobs, and they didn't pay very well, but there were always jobs. Now, Who even goes to a store anymore? How many stores are staying open? In the last year, how many stores have we seen close because everything's gone online and everyone's got delivery? They've got drones that can deliver things for you now. There is a very good chance, we've enjoyed with the exception of COVID and the Great Recession, we've really enjoyed full employment, which is when unemployment is below 4%, or well, it actually is 4%. Better than full employment is when it's lower than 4%. So we've actually had a labor shortage, with the exception of COVID, for the last 20 years, and it's been wonderful. COVID in the last 15 years. I'm leaving out the Great Recession. So that's a really long time, 15 years, to have full employment, with the exception of a recession. I'm sorry, with the exception of COVID. And so people have gotten used to this idea that, well, do I even need college? Admissions and our retention officer would really like me not to say this, but people have wondered, do I really need college when I can go and get a job and make good money without it? Well, rate of change, we could be going into a recession by the end of the year. We don't really know. And then all of a sudden, all those jobs that are willing to accept a GED or less may suddenly start requiring a master's degree, or be master's degree preferred and require a bachelor's degree. So it can be really hard to figure out. I graduated from college in the middle of a terrible recession in the early 90s that started earlier in Massachusetts and went deeper than it did in other parts of the country and lasted longer in Massachusetts. And so I saw that there were jobs, entry-level jobs, where they wanted a bachelor's degree. I had one, which was great, but it was still super competitive. And then the dot-com bubble came about in the 2000s, and all of a sudden there was a labor shortage, and it was really an exciting time. And I worked at a company where we went from requiring bachelor's degrees to, accepting a GED and training within, providing additional supports to make people successful. So it's really hard to predict the future. And chaos theory is an approach to career development where you say, okay, we can't predict the future, so instead we're going to adapt. And so instead, it's kind of like if you have any football fans out there, the Patriots used to run a read and react defense where they would see what the other team was doing and react to it, as opposed to what we're going into now, which is an attacking style defense where regardless of what they're doing, we're going to attack and try to set them back for a loss. And so that's chaos theory, which is really the future is unpredictable. And so you've got to be able to react to it and adapt and be able to have that as your philosophy. And then we get to design theory. And this was actually designed at Stanford, where they have a really good school of engineering. And it is an approach to problem solving, which basically says, let's try something and see if it works. Let's prototype it out. And if it doesn't work, let's try something else. And we're going to keep experimenting until we find something that works. And it became very popular in career development, so I'm told, because one of the great pushers of this, of what he calls life design, that makes it sound like an illicit drug, and I don't mean to make it sound that way. One of the great advocates of this approach, Farouk Day, who is the chancellor of career development at Stanford, really adopted it because he was worried about his own job stability, because he knew he had all these engineers who were going to get jobs and who were going to make really good money. And so why did the university need him? And so the idea became, well, if we apply some of our engineering design theory to careers, maybe we can help people to develop careers that are going to work so much better for them. And so it applies a lot of the design thinking that goes into engineering into developing a career. And so you brainstorm, you come down and you come up with ideas, And at the same time, you have a dashboard like you do in your car. And so all of the key indicators, right? So your car will tell you that, what's the temperature in the car right now? Is it low or cold? Is it hot? Right? If it's too cold, then you could crack an engine block. If it's too hot, you could crack an engine block. And bad things could happen. You could have steam coming out from underneath the hood. This is apparently the universal sign for steam. Fuel, right? Are you on full or at a half tank like I am right now? And I'll probably have to fill my tank today when I go grocery shopping, get some of those savings at the Stop and Shop gas tank with my extra value card. Or are you on empty? Are you on fumes? And how fast are you going? What are your RPMs? How hard is your engine having to work right now? And so if you are a machine with a dashboard, what is your dashboard telling you? What is your work satisfaction dashboard saying? Are you moving at a high rate of speed and enjoying a great deal of success? Is your tank full for your job? Or are you experiencing burnout and you've got kind of a low tank and you're overheating and your engine's not performing well at all? How about your personal life? How about your social relationships? What are the dashboards there telling you? And so really incorporating all of that into a theory of career development in which you are prototyping things. And so, maybe you're doing some job shadowing. I think I want to do this job, but I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a job shadow. I'm going to do an informational interview to see if it's something I even really want to do. And then I can, and if the prototype doesn't work, if the experiment fails, I'm going to try something else. I've got new information, I've got new data, and I can come up with new ideas. So when I was job shadowing, I found I really enjoyed working with the clients as an SLPA, but I didn't really enjoy the work of being an SLPA. So, all right, so I need something where there's a lot of client involvement, but maybe I don't want something where I'm doing the actual work of speech language pathology. And I'm not trying to talk you out of being a speech language pathologist, and I don't want Dr. Deo or Brittany to the speech language pathology faculty to come looking for me. I think it's a great career and I'm a big fan of it, but I'm just using that as an example. And so you're taking an engineering approach to your career and getting comfortable experimenting, actually creating dashboards for yourself and hand drawing them in. I've actually done that in some classes. And then there's that game theory that I was talking about, where you're thinking multiple steps ahead and trying to think about all the probabilities on what could actually happen. So it's almost like you're taking chaos theory and saying, well, maybe I can figure out what could happen and what is going to happen and predict the future. And actually come up with a strategy and play it out in my head or on paper on what moves I'm going to make strategically. And so those are some different theories. There's also the work of Dr. John Holland, who came up with the Holland codes, which, despite this graphic, have absolutely nothing to do with the nation of Holland. He was actually from Omaha. He actually, during World War II, was a classification interviewer, test proctor, psychological test administrator, and worked on, and came to the conclusion that many people have common personality tasks. He actually ended up at Johns Hopkins. Sorry, I did it again. Very important. If you're ever applying to Johns Hopkins University, remember, it's not John Hopkins University. There's an S after John. So it's Johns Hopkins University. His name's not John. It's a family name, Johns. So it's Johns Hopkins University, where he ended up being the professor emeritus of sociology. And so he actually postulated that in our culture, most people can be categorized into 6 themes. These are what we call the RIASEC themes. That sounds like a fancy Latin term, but it's actually an acronym for realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. And Holland tells us that all jobs will fall within one of those 6 codes or some combination. So the realistic, he called the doers. The investigative, he called the thinkers. The artistic, he called the creators. Social, he called the helpers. Enterprising, he called the persuaders. And the conventional, he called the organizers. And he actually created the Rexagon, hexagon, there it is, for six, a six-sided shape that incorporated all the different career categories. And so generally, when you take the, so years later, E.K. Strong, who also was big into testing and actually in World War II helped design the vocational tests for, I'm sorry, World War I for vocational tests for whether someone would be better jumping into a foxhole or peeling potatoes based on their personality, would apply later on the Holland codes to his strong interest inventory. And so, which he actually used to help people to figure out what career to go into. In fact, his son took it, and even though he'd shown no aptitude for medical science at all in his life, took the test and scored high for medical doctor and ended up having an amazing career as a doctor. And so on his, you get assigned 3 Holland codes, and the first 2 are really strong. And then there's the third one. In my case, at times when I've taken this, I've scored A, C, E. And if you notice, the A and the C are across from each other. They're opposite each other. And that's problematic. That usually means you're going to have a hard time finding a job that's going to meet all your different interests and needs. It's better if you end up with something like SAI, where they're all alongside each other. Right. So best example I can give you of people who are realistic, and I'm not going to go too deep into it. And if I had the budget, I would have you all take the strong and show you the results and walk you through that interpretation. But I'm just going to give you a quick overview because some of you are thinking, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into already? My dad is the classic realistic. He's somebody who enjoys working with his hands. He's a guy who built his own house. He by hand built an apartment complex. He loves solving those kinds of problems. And so he got a job at a company that used to be big in the area called Digital Equipment Corporation. And he had to wear a tie and he had to fill out reports and he had to go to meetings and he hated it. It was an awful day every day. And he would come home every day stressed out and miserable. So he would, to blow off steam, he'd build a shed. He would raise a garden. He would rip out some tree stumps, cut down a tree, build a deck, put in a road, all sorts of things. He'd build a garage. He'd build the neighbors a garage. The neighbors would come home and be like, Richard, why did you build us a garage? Those are the things he found relaxing. They're all things I find super stressful, which is why I never ask him to help me with a project at home, because I'd rather hire somebody. But my dad can just, he taught himself how to reupholster by book, which means how to, if you've got a couch with a hole in it, my father could come in, put in new springs, put in new foam, and sew it up with new fabric and make it look like brand new. As for fun, sometimes he'd go to the dump and find an old piece of discarded furniture, strip it down, and he would rebuild it and make it into a piece of furniture and sell it because he's just gifted that way. I did not get any of those genes. Now, my brother-in-law is huge into investigative. He's super into science. He actually graduated from Harvard with a degree in science. And he used to work for a company that would take seaweed and transform it into a gel that you could put it on slides for microscopes. And it would keep the contents of the slide inert or something like that. Now he works for a company and helps them reduce their costs by becoming more energy efficient. And he does all this science stuff. He goes all over the world and sometimes works with people who are like in Germany. So he has to get up at like 2 a.m. to talk to them. And we don't have much in common. He enjoys math, he enjoys science, he enjoys doing science experiments in his spare time. I tend to be more on the artsy side, and you know, I have absolutely no aptitude for art, but I'm always interested in, I guess that's why I enjoy doing video lectures, is because it allows me to kind of tap into my creative side, and because I'm flat out weird. Um, the My cousin, who I'll tell you about later, he has a daughter who's super artsy, and so she um, actually has been a curator at a art um, collection. She has taught people how to do art, and she has been a waitress because there's not always really great opportunities in art. My sister-in-law is super social. That is her. I guess she's on a slant. Uh, we often joke because I'm a hardcore introvert, and I often said, I would walk 2 miles to be left alone, and she's often said, well, gosh, I would walk 2 miles to be around people, and she cares. She cares about people, and just goes the extra mile. She works with students who have severe behavioral issues, and is currently working on her master's degree in crisis management because she likes helping people. And it's one of the most thoughtful people I've ever met. These are my two. That's my niece and my nephew. This is an old picture. He's about to graduate high school, and she just started driving. So I had Father Mark, who is special advisor to the president, but also does mass here. I had him bless both their St. Christopher's medals when they got their licenses, both for them and for those who happen to be walking on the streets around them. If you're in Maine, watch out. They're driving. Enterprising. So enterprising, people who like enterprising, like winning. They're kind of like into having big jobs, making lots of money, spending conspicuously, and they like sales, they like convincing people, they like politics, they like risk, and that's my cousin Jay, and he's just a really intense guy, and he likes to win. He likes to make a lot of money. He likes to buy boats and go on vacations, and he's really into enterprising. So jobs where he's the boss and he goes in there and he takes risks and he orders people to go do things, that he's all about that. And then conventional. I think of my wife, who is the one in the middle with my dog there. She works for the state, and she is really good at following policy. In fact, trains people on how to follow policy, and is very organized and detail oriented, and make sure everything is in its place and everything is figured out according to a particular plan. And so because of that, she really puts together a very organized approach to bureaucracy. And so you will often find folks like my wife working successfully in bureaucracies where everything has a place, everything has a proper way of being done, and she follows the proper way of doing things. If you ever want to kind of get some insight into what your vocational test could be, you could do the strong with me, but I really don't have the money to give you that test. Or for free, you could do So Can You. That's how you pronounce that. They have the Career Explorer. And if you want to take that, I have a link on my Elms Connect page for you to take that. And, it's not too bad. It's about, maybe 15, 20 minutes. And unless you take a really slow amount of time on it, in which case it will be longer. But it can help give you some insights into what might otherwise be mysterious for you in terms of your career. So I also want to very briefly, famous last words, talk to you a bit about the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is another theory that can be applied to careers. I'm not saying that it always is, and that if it is, it's just always done well. But I always tell I'm doing something because there are Muppets running around. Love this guy. He's very well dressed. Could use a little trim on the hair, and not crazy about that mustache. But now this is not a test; it's an indicator, and it's the most widely used personality assessment in the world. If you're a psychology or social work major, admittedly, it is often considered junk science by psychologists and sociologists, but it's very popular in business. And it's really designed to help us become aware of the value of differences and being able to try out new behaviors and incorporate different perspectives into our work and our interactions. So just for ha-has, if you could, I want you to write your name, just as you do probably several times during the course of the day. I'm going to assume that wasn't hard and that you're not experiencing any discomfort. Now I want you to do it again, but I want you to do it with a hand you don't usually write your name with. Not as easy. If you suffer any injury, you should probably go to urgent care. You might need to ice your hand after you do this if you're experiencing any discomfort. I'm going to go out on a limb that when you compare those two signatures, one looks a heck of a lot better than the other. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's named after Catherine Briggs and Isabel Myers, mother and daughter. And they were keen observers of differences in people. They were just keen observers of people. They both wanted to be writers. Isabel Myers would go on to write a mystery. Her mom wanted to be a writer and wanted to develop very well-rounded characters in her writing. And so she was working on theories that would allow her to do that and came across the theories of Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist who was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud. Hopefully you've heard of both of them, even if they're a bit dated now and their research has, gone through some iterations of relevance. But in it, he believed that, and he wrote it in his book, Psychologischen Typisch, which translates into psychological type, which he wrote in early 1920s in German. But once the English translation came out, she read it and said, oh, wow, this is exactly what I was looking for. And it says that there are 16 personality types based on 4 sets of dichotomies. So these are binary opposites. And so you have a preference for either extroversion or introversion, sensing or intuition, thinking or feeling, or judging and perceiving. Or you're a spider and you have 4 legs with hands at the end of each of them. So 4 arms, or rather 8 arms with hands at the end of them. And for each set of arms, you have one preferred hand that you assign your name with, right? And so your first set of hands, it's either your right or your left, or your extroversion or introversion. For your next set of arms, it's either your sensing or your intuition. For your next set of arms, it's either your thinking or your feeling. And for your next set of arms, it's either your judging or perceiving. But you have two hands. So you have both extroversion and introversion, and we're using the German spelling. But there's one you prefer. And so, where you focus your energy, are you an extrovert or are you an introvert? People prefer extroversion, like the outside world, prefer action over reflection. They talk things out. They develop ideas by discussion. They don't mind interruptions. They enjoy working in groups. They're seen as sociable. They have multiple and broad interests. People who prefer introversion have an inner world, a very deep inner world. They prefer reflection over action, tend to prefer one-on-one interactions, develop ideas by deep reflection, may prefer to communicate in writing, and enjoy working alone or with 1 or 2 others. They probably don't have a ton of friends, but they have very close friends with relationships they really deeply value. And so, action versus reflection, outward versus inward, people versus privacy, interaction versus concentration, many versus few, expressive versus quiet, do, think, do versus think, do, think. Maybe it's been a busy week and suddenly you look and Friday, you've got nothing planned. And so if you're an extrovert, maybe you're planning to go out and party down and get your boogie on, and everyone you know at the clubs, you're going to see them, and everyone you don't know at the club, you're going to know by the end of the night at the club. Or if you're an introvert, maybe you're going to stay at home with a good book and make a cup of herbal tea and unplug your phone and just stay in and be by yourself. Both people are recharging, but they have different ways of recharging. So, depending on which one you pick, that's the first letter of your MBTI code. The next is how you take in information. Some people take it in and present it in sequential step-by-step ways. Other people take it all in and present that information in a snapshot or a big picture kind of way. And so people prefer sensing, focus on what is real and actual and present, what is tangible, what is concrete, and they observe and remember specifics. They're factual, concrete, and sequential. People prefer intuition, focus on patterns and the meanings to see possibilities. They remember specifics when they relate to a pattern. They're abstract and imaginative. So sensing, it's all about the facts, about the five senses. What can they see, touch, smell, hear, see? Intuition, it's more about, what can you do when you take information in and store it in your unconscious a while to sort through it? Sensors are realistic, intuitives are imaginative. Sensors are specific, intuitives are general. Sensors focus on the present, intuitives future on the future. Sensors like to keep things the way they are, intuitives like to change. Sensors are practical, intuitives are theoretical. Sensors focus on what is, intuitives on what could be. Probably doesn't take too much to figure out which of these I am. One makes better eyewitnesses. Guess which? If it's a crime, you want somebody who's a sensor to be the eyewitness. So, next is thinking versus feeling. Thinkers make decisions by stepping back from the situation and taking in an objective view. People who are feelers make decisions by stepping into the situation and taking an empathetic view. I like to say thinkers think about it directly. Feelers think about it by incorporating a filter that includes the value that they put on the feelings of others. So people who are first thinking like to step back and be objective, get an objective perspective. They like to analyze and use cause and effect reasoning, solve problems with logic. People who prefer feeling step in to identify with those involved. They empathize. They're guided by personal and group values and assess impacts of decisions on people. So thinker's head, feeling heart, thinking detached. Feelers get very personal. Thinkers think in terms of things, feelers in terms of people. Thinkers are objective, feelers are subjective. Thinkers critique and like to find fault. Feelers praise and try to find things to praise. Thinkers analyze, feelers tend to understand. Thinkers are fair, but to them, it's about being firm. Feelers tend to take things on a person-by-person basis. So if we were about to have layoffs, if you were a thinker, you might look at it objectively and say, okay, we got to shave $40,000. Joe over there makes $40,000 and we can divvy up his responsibilities around other people, and that's how we're going to make the decision. A feeler might be like, but what about Joe's family? He's got a daughter in college. He's got a wife who's going through a medical thing. We can't just fire Joe. What will that say about us as a company if we fire Joe? And so they're making that decision by incorporating other values as a filter. All right, how you approach the world is the final set of pairs. So there's judgers, and they like to have a planned approach to meeting the deadline in a scheduled way, and perceivers who take a spontaneous approach to meeting the deadline with a rush of activity. So judges are organized, systematic, methodical. They make short and long-term plans and then love following them. If they go to a party and say they're going to go for an hour, even if they're having the best time of their life, after an hour, they're leaving. Oftentimes because they got somewhere else to be because they've made other plans. And perceivers are adaptable and curious. They're casual, they're open-ended, and they adjust flexibly to new information and changes. If they go to that party and they didn't want to commit to going to the party, but said if they could, they try to stop by. They stop by, they're having the best time, and they stay until the end. In fact, you're like cleaning up the next morning, you're like, hey, you know what might be fun? Going home. That'd be great. I want to go to bed. So, judgers, if they've got a day off coming up, might be like, I'm going to plan this out and make the most of my day. Perceivers are going to be like, I'm going to sleep in and take the day as it comes. I am a perceiver and my wife is a judger, and we have the same argument every Friday night that we've had for the last, we've been married for 22 years. It'll be 23 years this year. But we've had the same argument the entire time we've been together, which is like 26 years. Friday night will come along and she'll be like, "What are we doing this weekend?" And I'll be like, "Well, I don't know." And she'll be like, "Well, what's the plan?" I'll be like, "It's the weekend. We don't have to have a plan." And she'll say, "I won't enjoy the weekend if we don't have a plan." And I'll say, "I won't enjoy the weekend if we do have a plan." And so it usually devolves from there. So judges are organized, like to make a decision and move on. They like to be in control. They like to focus on the now. They like closure, be deliberate, and plan. Perceivers are flexible. They want to hold off to make a decision until they have more information. They want to experience rather than control things. They want to focus on later. They like to have options. They tend to be more spontaneous, and they want to wait. In some cases, they want to procrastinate. So, you have one of those, which is your primary of the two. And so, if you were to assign a letter for each one of those, one letter out of each pair, that'll give you your MBTI code. And with that, these are the 16 different types. And there are different tests that you could take. They're not the sanctioned MBTI test that I can give you and interpret, but I'd have to find the money to do that because it's expensive to do it. But you could go online and I can give you some links to some tests where you could actually do it. And at least get a pretty good idea of what your MBTI type is. And then you could do the thing I just did with you and verify it and see. And so this is the percentage of each of the types. And so different folks with different personality types gravitate to different careers. And so when you know your MBTI type, it can actually indicate different careers you might be interested in going in. And it can also help you in your interactions with other people who have different types than you. So if you work with a lot of folks who have similar types to you, you might all get along, but you're all going to have the same collective blind spot. And so sometimes it's good to have people who have different types than you because it takes care of those blind spots and you can complement each other. But knowing your MBTI type in theory gives you tools so that you can figure out how to work together because you can appreciate each other's needs. So I'm an introvert and my boss is an extrovert. So I know that I need to give her a certain amount of attention so that she feels connected. But she knows that I need a certain amount of time back here in my corner office in my hyperbaric chamber to recover. And so we've kind of worked that out. But we're both P's and we're both feelers. And so we're both kind of easygoing. We both don't like being too organized, and we both feel things really strongly. So we have that in common. She's a sensor though, so she's a lot more detail oriented than I am. But I'm more abstract. So that's just an example. Yeah, and so that's the MBTI. And you can actually have a group identity that you can ascribe to it. So I just wanted to share some different theories of career development with you. So you get your money's worth from this course. Again, you don't have to do anything with it. I will say that if you are struggling in this course and you need some extra credit, if you want to take one of those tests, which I'll include the links to, if you take the tests and just give me a one pager on what your results, I mean, it's great if you give me 2 pages, but stuff can be a little abstract. So, but even just a 1-page document on what you thought and what your takeaways were from it, I'll give you extra credit and I can help you pass this class. So if you actually sat through all this, thank you. I feel less alone, although I'm an introvert, so I do like being alone. If you're wondering what the creepy mask is right behind me, That's for a extra credit video in our last module. So something to look forward to or not. So I hope the semester's going well for you. And as always, I am not far away if you need assistance. And thank you for taking this class, and thank you for coming to Elms. You are Elms.